there is so much in this industry, and so much that really needs to be undone, and I don't know how to undo it. I'm just trying my best. But there is one thing that I kind of wanted to readdress. So I do have a video, grammar and editing, that was way back, and I have since, not necessarily going to say I learned more, but I know I keep talking in every single video about like how you really need an editor. Get yourself an editor. And you know, I keep saying like it can't be a writer friend, it can't be whatever. You know what? I'm going to do another video about editing, and I'm going to explain it a little more in depth than I think I did in the grammar and editing video. Because this is probably the most important thing you can do as an indie writer, is get yourself a real editor. And that does not mean hiring someone off of Fiverr or whatever the editing equivalent is, okay? No, it means really, really vetting people, and even people in your own life. You'd probably be surprised as to who can actually do this for you. But it is someone who's almost like a co-writer in a sense. So yes, you are the writer, but the editor should have a huge part to play in your story. And sometimes your book will be made, like, your editor can make or break your book. Now, I know the issue with this is that at the end of the day, like, I saw this video once where it's just like, oh, no one gives a crap about good writing or anything, which is like the most, like, disheartening thing, but also, like, not entirely true and not entirely fair. And I think this goes to show just how bad the indie writing scene is, the indie publishing scene, in that everyone has just kind of accepted that indie writers are not going to be good. And because if they were good, wouldn't they have gotten a trad publisher? And I've said this before, I will not take a trad publisher unless they offered me something I couldn't refuse. But what they would do to my work, I am not okay with. Also, it's very, very hard to get one. And they also don't necessarily care about good writing. But yeah, the fact that so many indie authors are really just people who couldn't get a book deal anyway. They wanted to, they tried, and they couldn't, so they went to indie publishing instead. And it shows. And it shows in the writing, it shows in the lack of editing, it shows in a lot of things. And so when this person comes out and says, I've been in the industry, I sell books, I'm actually making money at this, yet no one cares about the writing, it's like, yeah, I believe you, but that's not a good thing. And as I said in my, we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard, we need to hold ourselves to a higher standard, otherwise, I'm sorry, there's no point to this. Like, there really isn't. So, editors, that's a first step into how we can improve. And what is an editor? So, there is the grammar side of things, and I said this in my grammar and editing video, but I'll reiterate it here. Grammar is not the most important thing. First of all, at the end of the day, if you're going to use any sort of AI, use Grammarly or whatever. It's good enough. It's not great. I actually just had to re-edit The Chaos Child and put it up. republish it essentially, because there was just so many editing mistakes within it. I chalk it up to, this was my first book, and me and my editor didn't really know what we were doing. But B, I also threw it through Grammarly. And I'm pretty sure some of those mistakes were Grammarly's fault. Just saying. So, but if you use Grammarly, I'm not gonna fault you, because I think grammar might be the least of your worries. Most bad grammar can be excused if the writing is really good. There's also the issue of, like, most of people's bad grammar comes down to things like commas. And if you really, really want to understand how to use a comma, there's this little book. It's called Strunk and White, Elements of Grammar. Actually, one sec. Sorry, I got it wrong. The Elements of Style. Pick up one of these, okay? They will explain comma usage, and in such a way that you will not drive yourself nuts. And you will start to realize that, you know what, there is the technical way to do commas, and then there's this is your story, do as you will. And then the other points of grammar are usually obvious if you have had any sort of schooling, to be honest. And yeah, frankly, a lot of, like, the really, really nitpicky points in grammar that I was taught at some point were instinctual, and I do think most good writers will instinctually know how to do decent enough grammar. So you don't need yourself a grammar Nazi. And in fact, a grammar Nazi might actually ruin your work, because a grammar Nazi tends to be a little more technical. And then if your grammar is too perfect, you're gonna start sounding robotic, which is part of the problem with the AI, to be honest, is that it just starts to sound inhuman. And this is really quite obvious if you start reading a lot of AI written things. But more importantly, when you're looking for an editor, you need someone who can edit the content and talk to you about style choices, plot points, lore, characters, you name it. They basically should be the person who sits down with you and says, explain your reasoning here. And it's not good enough to say, well, I just like it. And that's what me and my editor do a lot, even before I go to write now. So this was something that came up in the book Yellowface by R.F. Kong. Those first 2 chapters that I read, she was talking about what sounded like her writing process, to be honest. And there were a lot of red flags for me. One of them being that the character literally wrote a whole book without ever talking to the editor, their editor. And I went, okay, so I used to have this. I used to have this thing where I'm like, if I tell people my story, I'm never going to get it on paper, right? And I have since learned that that's a load of crock. That most of the time, if I'm not telling people my story, it's because if I tell them my story, I will start to hear how stupid the story actually sounds. And this has come up with my editor, where I've talked to him about things in my books. And he goes, yeah, that's stupid. And I go, but that's like such a huge plot point. And he's like, then the plot's stupid. And I went, so I'm throwing out the whole story? He's like, yeah. It's like, okay, yeah, it doesn't work. And it kind of speaks for itself in that I never wrote it, too. And at the end of the day, most of the things that I've actually written, start to finish, I have talked through with my editor. Sometimes I'll write a scene and then we'll talk about it. Sometimes I'll tell him what I'm thinking, and then we'll talk through like why I'm having writer's block about that scene. Yeah, that's the other thing. If you're having writer's block, don't turn to ChatGPT. Please, for the love of God, do not turn to AI. Get an editor. That's what they're there for, to help you through the writer's block. Because 9 times out of 10, what I have found, at least personally, and talking to other writers similarly too, even if they don't see it that way, is that writer's block comes about because your story isn't working. And you can't really proceed. So if you force it by using AI, who will give you something, it's going to ruin your whole story. Because the whole point is not to push past a plot point that's not working. The whole point is to work through the plot point and either say, this works, or I need to change it. And that happens so much in my stories. That was something that came up with, so I'm in the process of working on the sequels to Private Ford Rayburn. So the second book is mostly finished. We're in the editing phase, because it was actually one book. Private Ford Rayburn and Yours, Marnie Rayburn were one book that got so long I had to split it into 2. But I have a sequel in mind. And I was having issues with like how to get the characters places and certain plot points. And I talked through it with my editor. And something notable was like, we were talking about what was the value of the sequel. And he was like, there's just like nothing cohesive about this. And I was like, okay, what do you mean? And he's like, well, there's no overarching premise, as he put it. And so we sat there and we talked it through, and at the end of the day I realized, oh, okay, I need to make one major change to Yours, Marnie Rayburn, which I did. And suddenly the whole thing actually worked. But it was that problem of like, I wanted it to be a certain way with the book series, and my editor pointed out like, well, you're getting writer's block and you're not writing this. What's going on? What needs to change, and how do we make this premise work? How do we make an overarching theme to this whole series? And we figured it out. So the editor is almost the person who basically helps write with you. And another like notable thing in R.F. Kong's book Yellowface that she had, which I think she was trying to be cute because the character was supposed to be drunk when they said this, but it like, so many red flags went off in my head when I heard this, which was the character described editing a book where she had this moment where she's like, you ever have this moment with your editor where it's like having sex and at the end of it you produce a baby and it's amazing? So as someone who's actually had children, like, no, writing a book is, not like having a child at all. Most notably, first of all, is that when I have a child, there is a huge sense of, this is quite amazing when you do it. I mean, you're exhausted and crap, but like, there's just this amazing feeling that you have. When I finish a book, I feel like crap. Like, it is one of the worst feelings in the world to finish a book. It is not exciting. It is not euphoric. It is just this like, oh God, this one chapter, I just have to rewrite it and then I'm done and I don't have to look at this thing for another year or so. I am so done and I don't want to think about it. That's what finishing a book feels like. So no, my books are not my babies. Not even close. The accomplishments I feel keeping my children alive are bigger than I do publishing a book. Not gonna lie. The other thing is that if the experience of working with your editor feels like having sex, you need to get yourself a better editor. Because to me, that implies that the editor is validating your choices. And the editor is not there to validate you in any way, shape, or form. The editor is there to make your book better and to work you through it. And so a good editor is gonna make you feel like shit. And I mean like real shit. There have been times where my editor has just said, "This sucks, you better redo it." And I'm like, how am I supposed to do that? And he's like, "I don't know, it just doesn't work." I spent 20 hours writing this scene. What do you mean, just redo it? Or like, okay, very notable example. First book that I will never see the light of day, that where I kind of got the sense of how this was the person who was going to be my editor. Which, by the way, was someone from my life, not someone I hired. Yeah, I gave him a rough draft to read that I hadn't let anyone else really read, and I was like, "Hey, is it good? This is like the first real thing I finished." He like yelled at me when he finished reading it. And it hurt. It hurt so much. He basically went, "No, this sucks. I hate this. I hate what you did to these characters. I don't like this at all." And I'm like, "But I just spent a year on this. I am so proud of this. I feel like I finally accomplished something." And he's like, "No." And then I looked at it again and went, "Oh, no, you're right. This sucks." And at least I didn't embarrass myself by trying to get it published. And that's how my relationship with my editor started. Was "this sucks." And that's what happens most of the time. If it's good, he'll kind of be like, "It's good, there's nothing to say." And if it sucks, well, then we have a huge conversation we need to have. And by the way, my editor is not a writer. My editor is not even that creative. In fact, that's one of the reasons he's so good at editing, is because you do not want a writer friend to be your editor. And you really don't want a creative friend to be your editor, because both types are going to want to change it to be more like what they want it to be. And that's not what an editor's job is. An editor's job is to use what exists and help you become better and help you write the story it's supposed to be. Not the one they want it to be, the one it's supposed to be. So writers are just notorious for not being able to let go. Even Tolkien was really honest about this. Like, he hated Lewis and Hubert's works. He often told them that their works sucked and that it wasn't going to go anywhere. And that's because he himself was a writer who understood that it's just not the way he would have done things. And so what did they want from him in terms of criticism? Because it's just not how he would do it. So he can't tell them how to make it work or how to make it better or anything, because he would just throw out the whole thing and rewrite it. And I firmly believe that. And I've had that too, where people have sent me their things to read over, and it's very hard for me to be objective, because all I'm thinking is, well, I wouldn't do it this way. And that's not entirely fair, because it does take all types. If Tolkien had written Narnia, it would have sucked. Narnia is its own thing, and Lord of the Rings is its own thing, and both, shall not. They have their place. But it's true. And so when I say get yourself a good editor, I'm saying someone you trust to tear you apart and hurt your feelings and tear at your soul. Because yes, while I'm saying children are not books, and please stop equating the two, okay? There is something about writing, and writing is more a reflection of who you are as a person. And to give it to someone, to say, tear it apart and help me be better, is one of the hardest things you will do, but it is 100% necessary. And if we're going to stick it to trad publishing, essentially, and change the industry and make any difference at all, we need editing, and we need good editing, and you need to find yourself a good editor. And you need to not be afraid of a good editor.